I find them to be kind of like the porridge and the little bears where it's like just right, it's right in the middle. So what happens with long-term rentals is they're easier, but they are really hard to cash flow these days. So we've got really high prices still that are slowly coming down, but not fast enough. And then high interest rates that are just like ticking up. So now with medium term or midterm, you can cash flow, which helps people a lot just getting in.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, thank you for being back for another episode. The title of this episode is Medium Term Rentals 101. We're going to take a deep dive into one of the hottest real estate investing strategies, at least the hottest for small and mighty investors, those of us who want to produce cash flow. On the one hand, we also want to build wealth. Well, medium-term rentals, which is in between Airbnb kind of daily rentals and long-term year-by-year rentals. We're going to talk about all the details about that with an interview with someone named Zeona McIntyre. She is the co-author, along with Sarah Weaver, of a great new book from Bigger Pockets. It's called The 30-Day Stay, A Real Estate Investor's Guide to Mastering the Medium-Term Rental. And in this interview, I go into depth both with Zeona's own story, which is really fascinating. She's taken a journey starting with just renting an extra bedroom in her house or her condo using Airbnb to growing and changing from just doing short-term rentals to doing medium-term rentals. And we talk about the benefits of different types of rentals. We talk about how she got into it, why she got into certain types of properties. And then we go into the fundamentals kind of step by step of what it means to get started with medium-term rentals, what kind of tenants you should look for, what's the process of finding those tenants, what locations are best, what types of properties are best. So all those details that you might be wondering about how to actually implement the medium-term rental strategy and why it could be beneficial to you, that's what we talk about in this interview. Before we get to the interview, it's time for this week's Behind the Scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on in my finances, real estate investing, or life behind the scenes. And this week, I actually want to talk about a personal goal and thing that I'm working on just from a learning standpoint. As many of you know, I'm living in Granada, Spain, and one of my personal goals is to become better at speaking Spanish and conversational in Spanish. For years, I've been conversational in the sense that I could get into a taxi, I could go to a restaurant and order what I needed. I could even have basic conversations, give people directions, that kind of thing. But I've kind of hit a ceiling over the years, just from lack of practice and not lack of going deep and immersing myself. So part of my Spain experience and something that matters to me is growing and learning and getting better at something. So I've been taking classes every week at Spanish. I've been going to local groups and hanging out with people, playing soccer, playing basketball with local Spaniards, and just speaking as much Spanish as I can to try to get to the level where I can have more nuanced conversations, maybe even talk about real estate investing and finance and the kind of things I love sharing here on the show, but doing that in Spanish. And so I actually want to make an ask of you. If any of you have Spanish speaking abilities yourself, or if you listen to other podcasts or YouTube channels that you like that are Spanish speaking related to real estate investing, personal finance, that type of thing, and you know of that one and would think it might be a good fit for me to go on that show or that YouTube channel, I would love to hear from you. Let me know about that. Send me an email at podcast@coachcarson.com. You can also leave a comment in the YouTube video if you're watching it on YouTube. Let me know who that is, what show you think would be a good connection with. And even better, if you want to send an email and connect me with that person, if you happen to know them, that would be awesome. So very specific behind the scenes segment today, but it might be interesting for you as well, because all of us have our own things that matter, whether that's learning about Spanish or learning some other skill or starting a business. A big part of my mission for this channel is helping you take care of the money thing, get real estate investing and your personal finances going and moving towards financial independence so that you can choose your own things that matter, whether it's learning Spanish or something else. So appreciate your help on that. And now let's get started with today's interview. Hey, Zeona, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is like dream moment. I have memories of walking around downtown Honolulu. I don't know why, but I was there for a period and I was listening. I found you on Bigger Pockets and then I listened to everything you've done.
Oh, thank you.
I was like, oh man, this guy's awesome. So this is fun.
Well, you as well. I think the first time I was introduced to your work and what you were up to was through Mindy Jensen, I guess a fellow friend, and just talked about how awesome you were. And you've also recently written a book. So congratulations. I want to just get that out on the front end. The 30-Day Stay, A Real Estate Investor's Guide to Mastering the Medium-Term Rental. you and Sarah Weaver, another friend of mine, also wrote that. So I'm just going to start off by saying congratulations. That's a big accomplishment, and it's an awesome book. I have recently read it.
Oh, thank you. It's funny because a lot of our friends have written books, right? When I was younger, I don't know that I ever thought I would know an author. And so it's kind of this weird thing where it's surreal and it's such a big thing. And then it's like diluted by the fact that all our friends have written books. You know?
We're hanging out in good circles, right? We're learning from each other. Right.
That's true.
Well, it is a big accomplishment, and it's a topic that I'd really love for this conversation to go. I want to go in a couple different directions, but I would love for it to be a 101, medium-term rentals 101, if you're willing to help me out with that. And because this is a topic it's on a lot of people's minds. And, I've been investing in real estate for 20 years now, and there's trends that happen. Certain strategies kind of bubble to the top. It was the BRRRR strategy. When I first started, a lot of people are doing seller financing and subject to, and that's kind of coming back around a little bit.
Yeah.
But medium-term rentals have a lot of benefits. There's a reason people are looking into it. So I'd love to go into that and just kind of pick it apart. But I want everybody to get to know you a little bit better, and I like to get to know you a little bit better. Just to start back with, let's just start with your when you got started in real estate investing. Like what got you interested in this crazy game of real estate, and how did you get started? What were your strategies or your approaches at that time?
Yeah, it was really accidental for me. So at the time I was 26, I was in massage school, and I had this whole plan. Like, I've always been a hustler and entrepreneurial, but I was like, I'm going to start this massage clinic, and like all these people will work under me, and then I won't have to do anything, and I'll just run the clinic. So I had like an idea, and I was moving towards that path. And then a friend of mine found out about Airbnb because he was living in New York City, where, you hear about things first when you're living in the big cities. And so what happened to him is that he got laid off from his job, and he was so burned out. He was just like, I need to go travel, but I've got this really expensive apartment, and I heard about this Airbnb thing. I think I'm going to just rent out my apartment and see if I can, at least break even or not lose so much money. And so very shortly after, he was telling me like, wow, I'm doing really well. Like, you should look into this. You should probably do this. And he was really persistent. And after a year, I pushed him back a lot, but after a year, he told me he made $50,000 off an apartment he didn't own. And so that got my wheels turning. And I was like, okay, maybe this can be just a side hustle. So my apartment, I had rented something that was a 2-bedroom, and I furnished the whole thing and got a roommate because I knew that if I furnished their room, I could charge more, right? So I was already house hacking a little bit, but then adding Airbnb into it once that roommate left allowed me to live for free. And then it was a catalyst from there. And so, yeah, who knew that it would take over my whole life? So now I'm all furnished rentals all day.
Yeah. So it was really a friend, and it kind of planted a seed, and then you tried it out on your own 2-bedroom apartment. And particularly, which you've become known for, is being someone who really understands the short-term rental, the medium-term rental, the Airbnb space. So a lot of people have heard of house hacking. You rent out an extra bedroom or an extra unit that generates extra income. What was it about this idea of shorter term rentals, this in general, that sort of, it was a light bulb for you, or that you kind of went all in and you started doing more of it? What was the thing that attracted to you for that part of the business?
Yeah, so this was 2011, 2012 when I really started, and I had been a real traveler, and I had used couch surfing. So couch surfing kind of hit the scene. It was really big in 2006. I was traveling through Europe then, and it was this place for travelers to kind of host each other, right? It was a free exchange, but you just went and stayed on people's couches or on their floor or anything.
Yep.
And so I had traveled a lot that way, and I'd hosted a lot that way. And so when I heard this concept of Airbnb, it wasn't foreign to me, because I was like, oh, yeah, it's just like couch surfing, but now you can get paid. So I was really into the idea. It just seemed like a cool way to meet a lot of travelers and also have that benefit of payment. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's it. Yeah. No, and I think that's what's cool about real estate. There's so many entryways and there's so many niches within real estate that a lot of it's your own interest. You're a traveler, which I appreciate as well, and you like to go places. And so you're not only a user of the product of Airbnb and short-term rentals, you had an early recognition that this is something that has some legs that can work. And if I remember right, kind of fast forward from there, like you started, like a lot of us do, with a house hack with your own residence. What was the next step where you actually took this idea that was working for you personally and you took it a little bit bigger?
Yeah, so I had that 2 bedroom and I was renting out the former roommate's room. And then I realized, like, wow, that's busy enough. I'm going to rent out my room. And I started pet sitting. I started staying with friends and doing trades for like babysitting or massage because I was a massage therapist. So I was just kind of like, how can I be out of my house? And then I saw, wow, well, it's so busy. I need another place. So I borrowed $4,000 from my dad, which sounds incredibly low now. But at the time that got me, first month's rent and deposit and that, just basic furniture. I went around and garage sale scrapped stuff and made it work. And yeah, that started renting. And so I lived between 2 apartments. I changed apartments a little bit, but I lived between two for about 2 years before I could afford to buy something. And so it was just kind of these little baby steps. I was just kind of doing what is in front of me naturally. And nowadays I hear about all these people scaling to like, 10 doors in, 10 weeks or whatever. I did it slowly, but, even 10 years later, I've got a great portfolio. So small and mighty, man.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I feel like you get me.
I've heard that's a thing. Some people are trying to stay small and mighty, right? No, wait, and just to be clear too, because I think it's such a cool step you took there, and it was intuitive that you borrowed $4,000 from your dad to buy the furnishings, and to make sure I understood it right, you actually leased the second place, right? You didn't actually buy that one. So you found a landlord who was willing to let you rent the place from him or her, and then you subleased it out to your Airbnb short-term tenants. Did I get that right?
Yes. So they call that arbitrage now. And now it's a lot more above board where, you have a special arbitrage contract and they know what you're doing and everything. At that point, Airbnb wasn't known. It wasn't widely known. I don't think Airbnb became widely known until maybe 2015 or later. And so I just said, okay, let me make sure that I have subleasing allowed in my lease. And so I had that, but I always kind of lived in this fear of like, man, this is something that can just be taken away. Like I'm not in control because I don't own it. And so I knew that owning was the goal for me. And there are a lot of people now which they make whole businesses off of solely arbitraging. But again, you don't have that control. Somebody can say, well, now I want to sell the property or something else. And you've just got to pick up and move.
Right. Yeah. I also did that strategy earlier in my career, and it was more for long-term rentals. I would lease a property from someone at, let's say, $800 a month. And then I would then sublease it out to my tenant for $1,100. And at the time, the reason I did it, and the reason I want to bring this up to a lot of people, you did it early in your career when money is at a premium, right? When not most of us don't have a bunch of cash just laying around, and to go get a 10%, 20% down payment on a property can be intimidating. It might take a while to do. So I love that it's a tool in the toolbox, to have either arbitrage. I called it a master lease at the time. And this is a strategy commercial real estate investors have done for years. Like there's skyscrapers in New York City and Manhattan that are leased from the owner for like 100 years or 80 years or something like that. And then they build a skyscraper on top of a leased property. So this is the thing. Like this is something that people don't talk enough about, but particularly for all of us who are just getting started, we're capital poor at the time. This is a way that, $4,000, that's real money, but that's easier to get sometimes, especially in high price markets, than coming up and getting the full amount of money. So I think that's so cool, because a cool part of your story that you used a tool in the toolbox and then kept moving.
Yeah. And the thing I like to tell people about is like, sure, a lot of people still have these businesses that are arbitrage. It's the same as like flipping or wholesaling. There's businesses that are really active, but I wanted to move towards something a little more passive. And I think investing in real estate gives you that equity and appreciation that you don't get otherwise. And so I think it's important to take that next step. Even if, you're still going to do arbitrage, make some of your portfolio owned.
It's like working a W-2 job. You don't want to work a W-2 job your whole life, even if it pays well. You eventually got to save some money, invest it, you got to own something. So that's a good segue. So you were in the short-term rental business. You kind of you scaled that a little bit. You bought some properties yourself, and let's talk about the short-term rentals in particular, because I think that'll be a good contrast with the midterm rental. That was pretty much your focus for a while, right? Doing the Airbnb short-term rental. What were some of the reasons you transitioned from only doing short-term rentals to this thing called a midterm rental? Maybe you could explain a little bit what the difference is between the two.
Yeah. So short term is anything under 30 days. The average stay ends up being like 3 to 4 nights. And then midterm or medium term is over 30 days. So hence the name of our book, 30-Day Stay. And the normal term is actually 3 months. And that's because traveling nurses get 13-week contracts and they often extend beyond that. So you get a lot of 6-month contracts from them. So yeah, that's kind of the difference there. What transitioned for me is that I was doing my own properties and then I started managing properties. So they call it co-hosting in the Airbnb world, but I did that on a pretty big scale. I managed over 60 units in 5 countries and I was just kind of like out there doing a lot of that. And it kind of burnt me out. And so coming around 2019, I was starting to say, hey, maybe I'm just going to start buying a bunch of new construction, long-term rentals with the manager, and I don't have to do anything. Like maybe I'll just transition my whole portfolio that way. And then I started buying those. So I have 5 units that are that way. But then 2020 happened and COVID hit. And so in one day, my portfolio that was like great with short-term rentals that I've been building this business for 8 years, it just turned off. It was like, it was really shocking to me that, I had bookings all the way into May and it was March, and then they just all canceled all in one day. And so that made me go, whoa, okay, I'm an investor, right? So I got to pivot. I got to figure out what else I can do here. And I thought, yeah, I'm starting to see people come in for longer bookings. I saw like relief workers and government contracts and nurses coming in, people quarantining, people needing bigger spaces so that they could, school from home and work from home. So there was a need for it, but my only problem was, can I do this without people needing to have tours? Because most of my places were out of state. And so once I realized, wow, a lot of these people book like an Airbnb short-term rental where they just book sight unseen, then I was fine. I was like, okay, we're going to make this happen somehow. And in those early days, there wasn't a lot of automation. There wasn't a lot of clear direction, but I just kind of figured it out as I went. And now it's getting easier and easier by the day because it's becoming so popular.
I think that's an interesting point. I feel like there's been a shift in the market. Maybe you could talk to it as well, that even 5 years ago, like definitely when I started as a rental property, it was just the accepted thing that you go to a property, you tour it, you go in person. It's become so much more common for people who've gone to Airbnbs to rent something sight unseen, to use the videos, to use the pictures, to use the reviews from the property, and then just rent it based on that. And there's a couple cool benefits, but it seems like the idea of being able to remotely manage, which you've done a lot of, to be able to travel around the world, to be able to be in one place and manage it somewhere else, it's kind of a game changer. Just that one thing, the fact that you don't have to necessarily be there in person to show a property, that's a game changer.
Yeah. And there are other ways you can facilitate it. Like if you have a ring cam, or even if you don't have that, but you have a wireless door lock, that you can change the code. You can tell somebody, hey, you're going to meet me there at noon. I'll just have you on the phone. I'll walk you through the house because I know it so well. We'll just talk about it while you're there. Then when you leave, I'm going to change the code. So there are ways to figure out a way. It's just getting out of your own way of being like, okay, how am I going to do it? Not how am I not going to do it? Or what are all the problems in my way that will keep me from doing it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to dig in a minute to some maintenance tips and some best practices, since you have so much experience with that. I want to go back to kind of 101 level again with why midterm rentals. So we know what they are. They're over 30 days or more. Short-term rentals are less than 30 days. The benefit that we talked about with short-term rentals in general is that there's more income because you're renting by the night or renting by the 30 days. So you're generally getting more income. So I'm curious if you could just kind of talk us through the general benefits of a midterm rental compared both to a long-term rental and also compared to a short-term rental. What's that look like from a financial standpoint and also maybe from a management standpoint?
Yeah, so I find them to be kind of like the porridge and the little bears, where it's like just right, it's right in the middle. So what happens with long-term rentals is they're easier, but they are really hard to cash flow these days. So we've got really high prices still that are slowly coming down, but not fast enough. And then high interest rates that are just like ticking up, and we don't really know how high they're going to go. And that just makes the monthly payment so hard to cash flow. So now with medium term or midterm, you can cash flow, which helps people a lot just getting in. So I see a lot of people, instead of starting with long-term, where that was kind of where people started, they're starting now just skipping over and doing the MTR. So that's nice. It gives people an entry point where they can still make the numbers work.
Do you have I'm thinking just like specifics sometimes help me get my head around it. Like, do you have a specific example of a property where you could say, here's what it would rent for a long-term rental. Here's what I think, or here's what I'm getting on a midterm rental, and just kind of compare those two?
Yeah. So, I mean, really easy rule of thumb is like market rate would be a long term. They usually say like 1.5 times is medium, and then 2 times is short term. But I'm starting to see that there are a few ways that you can kind of boost your medium term rental and then make it actually make as much or more than a short term rental. So I do have a place in St. Louis that I could use as an example. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. I think it could probably rent for $950 or $1,000. And I get $1,550. So right there, it's like 1.5 times, right? As a medium term. And I bought that house for $60,000, but it was a little while ago. So yeah, that one's working out for me.
Yeah, those numbers work.
Totally. And so short-term rentals, I just find they're a little bit more work. So first off, they're being regulated a lot. So a lot of places that used to allow it are not allowing it. And they're saying it has to be 30 days or more, or you have to be owner occupied, which that doesn't work. We're more than one property, right? So that's the first thing, is that you just can't do it in a lot of places. Then your second thing is that it's easier because there's less turnover. The hardest thing about furnished rentals is cleaning. And it's just that you have to rely on cleaners. A lot of times cleaning is not somebody's highest goal in life. So the people that end up cleaning, they couldn't do something else some of the time. You do find incredible, talented cleaners, but not everybody is that way, and not everybody is going to be super dependable. And so with a short-term rental, you've got to get those cleans in every 3 or 4 days. It's just a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. Things not to be cleaned well, somebody not to show up, just a lot of problems. And so that's a lot of coordination and just work in general. And then expense. When you have this medium-term thing, then, you're doing a clean every 3 months, every 6 months. It's really just a lot easier.
Right. So if you're almost like you have an engine that has too many moving parts, something's going to break. So like a short-term rental, you just have to keep your eye on the ball. You've got to pay attention to all those moving parts. And there's income potential, but you're more like, I always hear people say you're in the hospitality business, you're in almost like the hotel business, and that there's just a lot of details you got to pay attention to really frequently. So midterm rentals, less turnover, so you're doing that less often. The similarities though are you are furnishing the property. So just like a short-term rental, you're providing furnishings. Do you provide all the detail, all this, the silverware, the plates? Is it pretty similar in short-term rentals and midterm rentals in terms of what the property includes and what you have to do on that side of things?
Yes, and maybe even a little more so. I think sometimes short-term rental operators are really skimpy in the kitchen. So they might just not have a toaster or, a blender or whatever. So the more things you can have in there that make people feel comfortable, we have a little crock pot that has just been sitting in our house, and I'm like, we got to get rid of this. And my partner luckily was like, oh, you should go put it in one of the midterm places. And I'm like, oh my God, that's an amazing idea, because somebody's going to love that, especially a nurse who's gone all day. They can just set it and forget it. You kind of want those easy things in there for these people, because they are actually cooking and living in your property, right? They're not going out to eat every night.
Got it. Yeah, this is their home. They're going to use the crock pot. They're going to use the oven a little bit more. So you might need to have a few more things. Got it. Okay. So I like to dig into a little bit about that end customer. So somebody who's coming from the long-term world, I'm just kind of thinking my own perspective here. One of my fears might be that, all right, I kind of understand the person who's going to rent long-term. They're going to stay for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, maybe. I know where they work. I can look at the jobs locally. Can you kind of help me understand the type of person who wants to or needs to rent short-term? Who are these people? You mentioned nurses, you mentioned traveling workers, and then what's in it for them? Why are they willing to pay a higher amount of money compared to a long-term rental?
Yeah. So just for example, that St. Louis property, it's kind of like B minus C plus. It's right on the edge of a really great part of town, and there's a lot of cool stuff right there. But there's sort of just an area that starts to get worse as you move out. And so it's really on the edge, and it's still gentrifying, and everything's great. So that's why I got it for so cheap. But because of that, the type of long-term tenant I would get in there would probably be a little more blue collar. They might have a harder time paying rent. There might just be more gaps and um, just kind of in that. I think it would be a harder tenant. So that would be the type of tenant I wouldn't really want to deal with. Then with a short-term rental, it ends up being a lot of travelers, people coming through town. They might be a little harder on the home because they're kind of in this party mode of like, I'm visiting and I deserve this and all this kind of stuff that happens when you're traveling. So people are just, they sort of leave their mind at home and then they're just a little less responsible. What I like about the medium term tenant is that they're often highly like qualified and gainfully employed, and they're not in the property much because they're at the hospital a lot. Yeah, so it's a little different. I don't have to worry about them overstaying. I think a lot of people say, oh, well, what if you have to evict somebody or squatters or anything? A lot of these people have somewhere else to go, right? So they're a digital nomad and they say like, I'm going to be in Denver for a month, but then I'm going to Austin. So they've already got an exit plan. And same with the nurses. I have a contract now, but my next contract's in Minneapolis. And so they're already like planning to leave your property. So I haven't had any issues with that. So yeah, it's really a different type of tenant, and you need to see who do you want to serve.
Right. And you mentioned nurses. Are there any other professions you can think of where if we're trying to identify what group of people might be good candidates for being my tenants in these kind of properties? Like who are some other ones you're seeing out there as good midterm tenants?
Yeah, so St. Louis, I get a very different tenant than I do here in Boulder where I live. So Boulder, where I live, even though we're really close to a hospital, I don't get that many nurses because I get a lot of people coming for like Google, or they work at some kind of lab or science center or something like that. I get like teachers and students. So it's just like a different type of tenant. I get a lot of digital nomads that are working from home, but they want to be close to the mountains so they can either snowboard or hike. So yeah, it really depends. In St. Louis, it's interesting, but I get like a lot of people that are like RVing and want like a break. So like older people that are kind of like in this other stage of their life where they're traveling around a bit nomadically. Yeah, so it really depends. But I've had also in St. Louis, I've had some like military and different kinds of government contract people come through. So yeah, it really depends on your market.
So there's people out there. So I think that to kind of ease the fears on a lot of long-term tenants, that there's a shift. I mean, I know there's been people I know who've done midterm type rentals for a long time. And like in my area, there's Duke Energy is a local energy provider, and there's always been outage workers, and there's always been people working at the power plant who'd come in town, and I'd had friends who that was their niche. But it seems to me, and I don't know if you've noticed this, that there's the trend of people being a little bit more nomadic, people being willing to travel around, people remote work. It just seems like the world is moving that direction, and there's definitely people who are more comfortable with the Airbnb, type rental. So is that it seems like a trend? Is that correct?
Yes, I think it's a very Gen Z thing. I think this new generation is saying, hey, I actually don't need to own anything. Maybe some people own multiple places and they hop between them, but they're sort of like, I don't know what's going to happen to the world. I want to go out there and really experience it, right? So they're out there just like on the move. And a lot of our jobs are allowing for that now. So before COVID, I think it was 7% of the workforce could work from anywhere. And after COVID, it's been bumped up to over 40%. I think it's 42%. And even though some of those people will be called back to the office, not all of them. Yeah. Right. So there's just a lot of people that have this flexibility now. And I often see that when a traveling nurse is traveling, she's traveling with a partner who's working from home. Right. So it's kind of like the combo.
Yeah, no doubt. I even find that impulsive myself. And I'm not saying I'm the same as the market, but we're living in Spain now. And so in our transition here, being able to live in a midterm rental or find a tenant in my own property back at home who could be a midterm tenant for me was much more attractive because we plan on going back. And so I think there's this idea, and I think it's really very positive, that you can own your own home and also rent it out midterm and then go do like you've done, travel around, rent other places. You can be flexible. It's a fun lifestyle. Like I think hopefully a lot more people get into that.
What part of Spain are you in? I lived there for 3 months. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, we're in Granada, so it's in southern Spain and Andalusia, and our kids are going to school here, and we're just having a good time. So we're living
I love
and
that.
plopped ourselves down in town and just participating. And I've got my local soccer group I play with on Thursday nights, and my wife's teaching English, and we're just enjoying it. And we'll be here for a year.
I love it. Okay. I got to take notes from you.
Yeah, come on over. We can always have real estate meetups in Granada as well. So let me know.
Let's do it.
Cool. So I think we've gotten like what midterm rentals are, why it's a benefit. There's potential higher income and a little bit lower hassle, less turnover than short-term rentals. There's a trend that tenants are wanting to do this. There's a lot more out there. Let's go to the property itself. So if I were to start you over in a brand new market, or say you had to start over with midterm rentals, talk to me about what you would look for as an ideal location, maybe from a regional and a local standpoint, and maybe after that kind of get into what would be an ideal property for you if you were trying to start over.
Yeah. So again, I think this has to do with where you're buying, right? So I, in Colorado, have a lot of condos because it's kind of a higher price point here. So if you're looking at multifamily, you're looking at millions of dollars. And I just haven't had access to that. So I just pick off condos when I see a deal. So I've got 3 of them here and they work really well. And the condos that I like are especially the 1-bedroom condos, because those often get overlooked. First off, investors kind of turn their nose up to anything with an HOA, which, that's great. I'm happy that I have less competition. But also when people go to buy their first property, they usually want to push to that 2-bedroom. They'll save up a little more and wait so that they have a guest room or an office or something else. So those 1-bedrooms sit a little bit longer. So I find that you can negotiate them well. Then I specifically look for the type that they're in an older building that might have shared utilities. So it's got like a common boiler, maybe, baseboard heat that's all electric. And so you don't have a furnace or a water heater. So the maintenance is virtually nothing. I even have some where it's a shared washer and dryer. And I love that for midterm. Yes, a long-term tenant might not like that, but midterm, they don't care. As long as there's something right down, a couple steps away, they can get to it. They're happy with that. And then again, it's 2 appliances I don't have to maintain, right? So the only things that can break are really in my kitchen, and they've lasted a long time. So I like that I don't have as much CapEx to deal with. That's kind of in my HOA fee built in. And the last thing I love is that they have really low utilities because so much of it is shared. So I'm paying for basically Wi-Fi and electricity, which I think my electricity is like 20, 30, 40 bucks depending. And so that is really low as well. So I think that people immediately go, oh, I have to have a single family home or multifamily. But in a single family home, you're paying all those utilities. And it's about $500 a month if you're looking at, lawn care and snow removal and, everything. There's just a lot. And so multifamily is the next thing I would say, that if you have just an area that you're investing in that has a lot of multifamily, it helps because in this you are paying utilities. So if you've got 2 to 4 units, then maybe the utilities per unit is going to be $300 instead of $500. And that saves you on your, cash on cash return. So hopefully that helps. Any property type can work, but I like those other ones better than single family.
No, that makes sense. And, sometimes I like the idea of going against the flow. A lot of long-term rental investors, myself included, like kind of, I'm not sure about condos. I don't want to mess with that. I want to own the whole building. But that makes a ton of sense why that would be attractive for a short-term or a midterm rental. And I'm kind of reading between the lines, but I know the trend I see a lot as well is people want to be near walkable amenities. They want to be places where they can go and be involved to kind of have the activity, as opposed to being out in the country or in a suburban area where it is kind of quiet. I mean, the quiet's good, right? But a lot of people go there for school districts and for space and having a yard they can cut. Well, I imagine that a midterm rental, they want to have a safe place. They want to have a quiet place, but they also maybe want to plug into what's going on around them. Is that also a consideration with condos and multi-units, which tend to be a little bit more dense areas, walkable areas?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. The other thing I'd say about multi-units that I like is that one thing I don't love about a single family home is that if it's vacant, that's it. That's the whole thing, right? And you're just sitting there hoping and praying for something to come along. And that's kind of one of my problems with short-term rentals as we go into a recession, is that people are traveling less. And I just think there's a lot more vacancy coming up. With a multi-unit, it's rare that all the units are going to be empty at the same time. So at least you've got, one unit or two units holding it down for everything else.
Right.
So some people do a hybrid where they've got, maybe one or two long terms and then two medium terms or whatever in their building.
Yeah, I like the idea of like a little portfolio of mixing the long term, the short term, or the midterm, and this getting the benefits of both of those. And maybe you could also try it out if you had 4 units and you have a fourplex, and I have some of these as well. You could try out one unit doing midterm rentals, see how it goes before you go all in and just do the whole thing. And if that works, then you can spend the money to go to unit 2, 3, and 4.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so we got the property type. What about general locations? A lot of short-term rental people, obviously for good reason, are concerned about changing regulations, what's going on in towns. Have you found certain types of cities, regions work better than others, or are there other kind of general criteria we should be looking at?
So even though all your tenants won't be nurses, you're the safest if you plug yourself in close to a hospital. And so what I like to look for are hospital clusters. So I found that places like St. Louis has this, Denver also has this, where they end up just putting a lot of the hospitals all close together. And so if you can have at least two hospitals within, 5 miles, which is generally like a 20-minute drive, that's pretty good. I don't think that nurses want to travel more than like 20, 30 minutes to their job. So looking and trying to plug into something like that is a good, safe spot. And then beyond that, I mean, you can look for tech centers because, a Google campus will definitely bring you more tenants. But I think I go on hospitals and then I kind of like see what else is out there from there.
So core customer nurses, and then, that'd be kind of your base case, and then branch out from there. I've heard some people talking about universities. Have you had any luck with like traveling professors, students? Because I'm in a student rental market. That's my long-term renters. But I've also thought it might be interesting to think about charging a premium on some units and then trying out, see which one of these short-term people or midterm people might be willing to pay a little bit more for a unit.
Absolutely. With Boulder, we are definitely a college town. And so we get a lot of people usually in their like grad programs. I had a student actually from Spain who did like a semester. And so he rented one of our units because, if you're coming that far, you probably don't want to bother with getting all the furniture and, so he just picked something easy and went from there.
Yeah, great. Awesome. All right. So I'm pretty clear on who our customer is, the types of properties we're going to look at. A lot when I'm teaching people long-term rentals, a big part of my focus then is like, all right, what does it mean to have a good deal? Like, let's just be super clear on having your buy box on the type of property, but then also on the numbers. Like because sometimes you're going to have to pass on deals. And so when you look at a midterm rental, do you look at it differently than when you're analyzing a long-term rental? Are there any different metrics, or are they all pretty similar to the way you would analyze a long-term rental?
So you have to put in just a couple more categories. I make sure I have furnishing up front. So you want to have that in your cash on cash, right? You need to know that's a big expense up front. And then utilities expense, because that can really throw you off. That, like I said, could be $600, $500 a month. So that really changes. I think a lot of times when people do long-term rentals, they're happy with like 200, 300 cash flow. But if you're paying 500, that'll eat it completely, right? So you got to make sure. And then I look for 15% cash on cash return. Sometimes people are happy with 10, it sort of depends. But that's my threshold. And so people have to figure out what it is for them.
So pretty similar tools and formulas you use: cash on cash return, net income or cash flow, but adding in some extra expenses. So being aware that you have utilities, you have furnishings up front. It also seems to me like one of the downsides potentially, because things change, is like if this doesn't work, if I choose to do a different strategy, you probably would want to have a higher cash on cash return on a midterm rental, just in case you needed to fall back to kind of a plan B or C and do a long-term rental. Because if you built a really skinny midterm rental deal and then you dropped from 1.5 times the rent down to that normal rent on a long term, you'd be in trouble if you played that too skinny on the midterm rental. So that makes sense to me intuitively, to make sure you're getting a better deal on the midterm rental so that you can then have a long-term rental just in case.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. All right. So deal analysis. The thing I want to get into more now, which we alluded to earlier, was actually managing the property and the process. And what's interesting to me about what you've done is you're also self-managing a lot of your properties. So can you talk to me a little bit about just that that mindset? Like what led you to self-manage more of your properties? And then what's involved? What are some of the things people need to be aware of that they'll want to pay attention to, and some of the best practices there?
Yeah. So, I started in Boulder, and then once I started buying property, I wanted to continue buying instead of renting and re-renting. And so I knew that I just couldn't afford this market, not when I started. So I got one here. And then after that, I learned about St. Louis from a friend. I went and visited her for a wedding, and I realized how affordable that market was and the potential there. So I started with one and tested the waters, and then quickly got three others.
I love
And really
St. Louis,
just
by the way. My wife's from St. Louis, so
yeah,
I'm a big fan. I drive around
I'm
St.
a
Louis, and
fan too.
I love the brick 2 stories and the multis. It's just such a beautiful town.
It is a beautiful town. I think like people don't realize it's a very cool place, and it has huge demand because they have a hospital cluster.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm slowly moving out of that market, but it has been that was a great place for me to grow. Um, what are we?
I
Ask me
threw
the
you off.
second
I
part of
threw
the
you off there. I'm
question.
sorry. Yeah. So
Just throw me off.
we're
That's
talking
all
about
good.
management, self-management,
Okay,
and
self-managing. So
what's involved in that.
I had to learn how to do that out of necessity, right? Because I was from afar. And so I just had to figure it out. And what I learned pretty easily or quickly is that I needed a cleaner and I needed a handyman. After that, I can, later find a specialty plumber or something that I need if that comes up. I didn't need to bog myself down with so many details. I just got those basics covered and then could roll from there. So yeah, that is actually pretty easy. The thing that is a little more complicated with medium term is similar to short term. When I started, there was no automation. They just didn't have softwares. And so as they started coming in, oh, great, it makes everything so much easier. Now it just seems like you don't even have to be involved. Just plug everybody in and then it's just happening for you. With medium term, there's a little more steps and they're working towards it. I think the automation is coming. But because you often are having someone from Furnish Finder or another site, you have to write a lease, right? And so when I even started this, it's gotten easier since then, but I had to, find a lease. I even just kind of created my own from a few leases that I saw and changed the terms as I went along. But I had to like upload it into a DocuSign and then have them sign it and come back. So there was just like a lot of steps. But now if I book on Airbnb, I don't do a lease, and that's easy. It's automated. If I book on Furnish Finder, we're calling the person and just getting a vibe, making sure they don't sound too aggressive or difficult. Then I'm calling landlord references, which would be something you would do with a long-term rental. And from there, if they're ready to go and I feel good about them, then nurses I don't background check because they're highly background checked for their job. And so I don't feel like I need to do that again, but I might ask them for a proof of employment. So I know they have a job somewhere. From there, I have to get a lease going. So what I use is Avail, and Avail's made it really easy because whatever your state is, they'll give you just a standard lease and you can just plug in the blanks, fill in the blanks with their info, and then just shoot it out to them. So in the platform of Avail, they do the e-signature, they do the rent collection. So from there, they can just, pay the deposit and the rent and set up auto payments. Because I started collecting from, PayPal and Venmo. You do not want to do that. So it's good to have something like Avail, not only because you'll forget, but also because you don't want people to have a direct channel to be able to pay you because they're harder to evict that way. So there's just certain things that, you learn over time as you go, but it's not too complicated. Those are the basic steps.
And so the automation, which I'm hearing, and it has been a big help in my long-term business. When I don't self-manage as many of mine now, I have a few, but just I remember back in the day when, I was meeting people personally and just handing them the lease. That was the norm, I don't have an office, but we would meet at McDonald's or the library or whatever. The evolution from there was scanning it in. I still had to fill it out and then send it to them on DocuSign. But a lot of the software, like Avail is one that I promote as well and talk to people about, and I'll put a link to them. The online software is you can basically have paperwork in there. They can just click on some buttons like we're used to with a lot of other software. And then that automatically kind of goes into, now they're a customer. You can start invoicing them through that. So having an all-in-one software that's free, that you don't have to, or very low cost, is a thing now. So I think that's a huge step up. And so you're sort of playing in the world between Airbnb and long-term rentals because not everybody comes through Airbnb. So you're finding people through websites called like Furnish Finder. You've mentioned that a couple of times. Are there any other ones that people come to you through other than Airbnb and Furnish Finder that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so there's two ways to find tenants in this field. So you can do the low-hanging fruit, which is Airbnb, Furnish Finder, VRBO if you want to go that route. So we're on those sites, and that's pretty automatic. People come in and you've got plenty. You could totally be full from just those sites. But if you spend a little bit of time and energy and you decide, hey, I'm really going to invest in this business, they want to do MTRs, then you can start building relationships with the hospitals, with the universities, with different government agencies or tech centers, and get on their list so that they're placing people at your property. Those people are going to pay 2 times market rate, 3 times, sometimes 4 times. And so it's a lot more money that you can make on less properties, so small but mighty. And I just like that idea. So it's more work and a lot of people are not going to go there. But if you want to, and if you invest in it or you train a VA, that upfront work could pay off dividends.
No, that's smart too. I mean, this is still a relationship world. So if you have a relationship with a human resources officer at the hospital and they trust you and they know you, that's hard to compete with that. I mean, that's Airbnb it's a marketplace. There's lots of people out there, and that's so smart to be. If you have a long-term vision for your business, building those relationships, having those leads coming in, is the fee an issue? Like, is the fact that the Airbnb charges you a fee? I mean, obviously that's something. Does that also increases your bottom line if you're going directly to the customer instead of having to go through a platform?
Yeah, I was on a panel last night and it was all MTR operators. And the one girl said, just out of ease, she makes everyone, even people she finds on Furnish Finder, book through Airbnb. The problem with that is that you pay Airbnb 3%, but the guest pays 14%. And so for me, I'm thinking I could charge 14% more. Why would I want to do that? So if they come through Airbnb, I say, great. I'm not going to take it off the platform. Airbnb offers a lot. They've got their insurance coverage and, they do all the marketing, so they should get their cut. But if I find them somewhere else, I'm definitely going to spend that extra energy to build the lease and whatnot because I can charge more.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you've talked about a couple team members. So you're managing the property, whether you do it yourself or you hired somebody else. There's still going to be some key team members, and I know you're a real estate agent as well, right? So you understand the power of having third parties, people you work with. I love my real estate agents that I've worked with over the years. I have property managers. Who are some of the key team members that if you're going to get serious about midterm rentals, like these are the people you got to have on your team?
Yeah, well, an investor-friendly agent, I think, is really key. And the reason behind is that person's going to know the trends in your market. They're going to know what's legal, what's not, what's the best areas for whatever reasons. Like, they are investing and doing the same strategy. You don't have to worry about them competing with you. But I always find it like perplexing when people are going to an agent who doesn't even own property. They just don't see it the same way. And so you're paying this high commission and you're not getting much out of it. So you want somebody who's going to teach you how to run numbers and mentor you and say, no, you need to stay away from that property, but this one's the gem. And from that person, you can get the contractors you need, the handyman you're going to have, the cleaners even. Like, there's a lot of people that can come from a well-connected agent. So that saves you a bunch of time and hassle anyway. But I think the most important people is the agent, the cleaner, the handyman. Those are the ones that you really need. And from there, you can decide, do I want to hire somebody to help me with furnishing or not? Am I going to do that myself? Am I going to self-manage? A lot of people get bogged down with the price of management. So in this furnished rental space, it can be 15 to 25%. And so that can really eat into your profits. But I always tell people, just train a VA, get an assistant, have somebody doing 10 hours a week for you. That doesn't have to be super expensive. It doesn't have to cost anywhere near even 10%. But do it yourself first so that you know how to train somebody.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And I've done management myself too. And from the very beginning, I've now kind of gotten to a different place in my business where I'm happily paying 25% to a short-term rental management company who I know and trust. And so I think it just depends on where you are in your career. And I think it's super smart early in your career to maximize all of the cash flow you can when you have time and you have energy, because then you're going to learn, you're going to make the money, you can reinvest that money in more deals. And then if you find yourself, if you're a person who's super, super busy and has more money coming in than time, then you can always choose then to pay somebody to do it. But then you've already, like you said, then you know what needs to be done. If you've managed it yourself, if you've hired the cleaners yourself, you now can hold that person to a little bit different standard than just abdicating everything to them and saying, hey, go do this, and then not knowing what it means to do a good job at all.
Yeah.
Awesome. This has been so helpful. You have been really, really detailed about these answers. So I appreciate that. I want to step back from the midterm rental a little bit and just go to more general real estate investing, financial independence kind of ideas or topics. And one of those is, a lot of people listening to this, they're in the stage where they don't know what they don't know yet. They're maybe they own one property, two properties, maybe they haven't even bought a property yet. And I think people get afraid of the unknown. And so I was hoping you could talk about anything that comes to mind, just go for it. But maybe a mistake or something that didn't go well during your real estate investing career that what happened, but then also how you've kind of gotten through that and gotten better as a result.
Yeah, I think partnerships, that's like an important thing to really vet. So I have a lot of people that I do partnered stuff with. I've got like a co-host on my podcast. I've got a partner with my meetup group and Facebook group, and I love buying properties with people. So I have a lot of partners in my life, and I am a strong believer that you go further with somebody else, right? You can't do it all yourself. But I have had one partnership that went sour on me. And I think that was a result of not getting things in writing, not making sure that contracts were signed. So there was just a couple of steps where it was a little too casual. And that was my mistake. And that was a great learning experience for me. So I think that is something important to just remember, that you might own this property for 30 years. And so you're kind of getting married to this person, and just make sure that you really understand their motivations and their character and their goals, because it might really change for you.
Good advice. Yeah. As someone who's had a business partner for 20 years now, and I think a lot of it was luck in the beginning that I just happened to get the right person, but picking the right, communicating up front and getting it in writing is such a big deal. So good advice. All right. One other question I have is just, here we are, 2022, and towards the end of the year, we're kind of in an economy that's in flux. This is interesting. You've been in the business for a while now, and you've been in different strategies. Like, are there any trends or changes in the real estate landscape, investing landscape, that just have you interested or that you're worried about? Like, I'm just curious, this is a smart person who knows this business. What are you paying attention to?
Oh, you call me smart. I mean, you brought this up at the beginning. I am really focusing on learning seller finance and subject to right now. And so I feel like I should talk to you offline, because I think you already know what I need to figure out. But sure, it's something I'm working on, not only for myself, but also for my clients, because there are a lot of buyers out there and they're just sitting and waiting. And I get it, because I see now that the numbers they're trying to hit are just not possible. And I can make those numbers happen if we're taking over someone's mortgage at 3% or less, or, even up to 5% sometimes can work. So we're really working on that and just trying to understand all the terms. It's definitely a little more complicated, but I think there's going to be some real need to know that. That's a strong tool to have in the tool belt for the next couple of years.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny to see, we mentioned earlier how the strategies kind of come full circle. But just to agree with you on that, like the every market has its different pluses and minuses, challenges and things you have to deal with. And today, at interest rates 7%, 7.5%, sometimes the opportunity, like you're saying, is that there's a bunch of existing mortgages out there at 3%, 4%, 5%, who, if you know how to work with the seller, not every seller is going to do this, but if you have somebody who's willing to work with you, and you can either take advantage of their current mortgage by taking over payments subject to, or other situations where I'm working with someone who I might be a partner on a deal with, and he is negotiating with the seller just to get seller financing, straight seller financing with a long-term landlord who's paid their property off. They're kind of tired of the property, but their property's gone up in value a lot, and they like the property and they like real estate, but they don't really want to put their money in the stock market. They don't want to do something else with it. So there's just a ton of opportunities that if you know what you're looking for, and you have to know how to negotiate, though. That's the point I think you're making. It's a little different negotiation to talk to a seller and ask them to finance it to you. It's more like a partnership. It's more like a going to the bank. You're having to prove your credibility to that person. And then it's kind of like the lease with the short midterm rentals. You also have to have the paperwork to back that up. So if they say yes to that, what's that paperwork going to look like? What's the contract? So I love that you're mentioning that. And maybe we can have a follow-up conversation. That'd be great to see how you can mix.
I would love that.
Mix some short, we'll mix some short-term rentals. And by the way, I'm going to put a link to your podcast. You do an awesome job with that. And so people should check that out and listen to that as well. So, all right. So final question here is one I ask all my guests, that people are going to be at different points of their journey to financial independence. Some people are just starting, they have no properties. Some people are further along, but most people listening to this, they're in the trenches, they're digging, they're saving money, they're buying properties, their heads down, they're focused. As someone who's a little bit further along, you've bought properties, you've had some success, you've made some mistakes. Looking back, what kind of advice would you give them, or just a number one tip that'll help encourage them and help them kind of take some next steps on their journey to financial independence?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm listening to Will Smith's book, Will, and it's so inspiring. He even said that this morning, that, you're a mix of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think it's important to choose wisely. So what happens to me in this field is that I fluctuate through the financial independence people, they're much more grounded in what's enough and having a balanced life. And then the real estate people who are like, more is better, go, go, go. Everything's about money. And we measure based on doors and cash flow and all this stuff. And so it's really easy for me to get sucked into the other side. And I'm now saying, wow, I need to spend more time with other people that are a little more grounded, that are having lifestyles that I want to have, and not just competing with my friends that have 100,000 followers and different stuff going on, right? And it's hard. It's not easy.
No, I hear you. No, I'm right there with you, and that is. I feel like
that's why I want to be your friend.
Yeah, but both of us are straddling that world. Yeah, the financial independence world, and I think the first time I heard about you, Zeona, was on the Mr. Money Mustache, right? Didn't you have an article in there that went big? And so I share that desire. It for me, it's like, this is a constant struggle, because I'm competitive. Like I'm ambitious. I like to do things and climb, but for me, like, physically unplugging myself from a location and going somewhere else, particularly in Latin America or Spain, for me has been my kind of happy spot, where siestas are a little bit more of a thing at times, and people they slow down a little bit. They enjoy 2 or 3 hour meals. They enjoy the value of friendship, like these things that you can't even quantify, but are so valuable. Like when you look back at the end of your life, you're like, that relationship I had with that person, that amazing dinner I had looking over the Alhambra, drinking a glass of wine, like, wow, that was amazing. It's kind of hard to quantify that on Instagram and your stats, right? It's like not easy to do. And yet that's so important. So yeah, thank you for that tip. That's something I need to hear. We all need to hear. And it's something we can aspire to, right? And that's a big part of my mission with the Small and Mighty Investors, try to have people like you on the show who are struggling with that as well, but also figuring out how do you build a portfolio. And there's so many different ways to do it. Short-term, midterm rentals are a big part of the equation right now. But it's fun to share stories like yours to inspire people to say, hey, this is something you can do. You can travel, you can write books, you can do different things and also enjoy life. Yeah. So thank you for your time. I want to give you a chance. So we started the conversation talking about your book. It's been a big success. People are buying it. It's doing really well out there. I'm going to put a link to it. We're both Bigger Pockets authors, so I'll put a link to the Bigger Pockets store so you can get the book. There's a lot of cool bonuses if you go to Bigger Pockets. And is there anything else you want to say about the book, or any other things you want to let the audience know before we head out?
Yeah, so if they use my name, Zeona, you can get 10% off the book. So definitely do that. The book was written with the intention that someone could pick it up, not really know about real estate, and could take action and buy something right after and start doing it. That was really important for us. We didn't want to talk in like high-level conceptuals. We wanted it to be very actionable. And then we added in a lot of case studies, and a lot of them are from women, which we felt really excited about because we're both female authors. I wrote it with Sarah Weaver. And there's just a lot of men in this space. So it's nice to say this is a place where a lot of women shine with furnishing, with hospitality, making a nice nest for people and being nurturing. This is a great way to get into real estate if you're feeling intimidated.
I love the case studies, by the way. That was one of the things that stood out to me in the book. I mean, obviously the meat of the book is also really good, but there's a nice mix. You go through a few pages of the chapter, get into the heavy stuff, and then here's this case study of somebody going into a depth about a certain point, and a lot of amazing women investors who are really just killing it out there. So love the book. People should check it out. If you're even remotely interested in being a midterm rental investor, if you're curious about it or you really want to go all in it, this is like kind of like your guide. This is a handbook that'll go into, I mean, the detail. We went into a ton of details today, but we didn't even scratch the surface on a lot of the systems and the operations and the when you're picking up properties, there's a lot of criteria you need to think about, and they have checklists in the book. So really good, really well done. I thought it was awesome, and look forward to people getting the book, getting their hands on it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I will look forward to talking to you soon. If you happen to come to Granada, come this way, let me know. And if not, I'll see you next time at the Bigger Pockets Conference and in other places. Nice talking to you.
Bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Zeona McIntyre and talking about midterm rentals. Some of my big takeaways were, of course, the specifics of the midterm rental business model. I'm hoping that's going to be helpful for a lot of you who need to mix that in with some of your long-term rentals or your other short-term rentals. But for me, the even bigger takeaway, sort of the meta lesson behind her own story, is that she pivoted. That we all have these points in our careers and our real estate investing when what was working before for you personally stops working, or the economy changes, things happen. That is so normal for all of us, that we have these things where we bump into a wall. And the entrepreneurs, the great ones like her, they make pivots, they change. They don't, complain and stick their head in the sand. They just say, what can I do to make this work? And that's when you find new opportunities like this. And so she's become an expert in this little niche, this strategy of midterm rentals, which is paying off for a lot of people, because she quickly pivoted, because she's a learner, because she has the humility to go out there and learn and change and grow and make mistakes, even when things aren't going well. So for me, that was a big takeaway and really encouraging from listening to her story. And I just want to encourage you that I'm going to have more interviews with people like Zeona that are going to talk about their specific stories and niches or strategies. And actually next week, I'm talking to someone who's going to be discussing remote real estate investing. This is Michael Album. He is a remote real estate investor from California, also is the host of the Roofstock podcast called The Remote Real Estate Investor. So those of you who are investing long distance, whether that's across town or across the country or across the world, we'll talk all about how do you do that. We're going to talk about turnkey rentals. We're going to talk about other types of rentals. So looking forward to sharing that with you in the next week's podcast. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.